When we open the pages of On the Origin of Species, we step into the restless and curious mind of Charles Darwin, a man who dared to ask one of the most unsettling and transformative questions in human history. How did the incredible diversity of life on Earth come to be? In a world where many believed species were fixed, created exactly as they appeared, Darwin proposed something radically different. He suggested that life is not static, but dynamic, not designed in a single moment but shaped gradually over immense stretches of time. His ideas did not emerge from idle speculation. They were forged through years of observation, doubt, comparison, and relentless thinking. The journey truly began when Darwin embarked on a voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, traveling across oceans and continents. During this expedition, he encountered landscapes and creatures that challenged conventional understanding. In South America, he discovered fossils of giant extinct mammals embedded in cliffs, eerily similar to living species in the same regions. Why would extinct creatures resemble current ones found nearby? On the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that finches on different islands had distinct beak shapes, each seemingly adapted to different food sources. Tortoises varied from island to island as well. These were not random curiosities. They were clues, subtle hints that species might change over time in response to their environments. Darwin's revolutionary idea was built on a simple but profound observation. Variation exists within every species. No two individuals are exactly alike. Farmers and breeders had long taken advantage of this fact through artificial selection. By choosing which animals or plants to breed, they could enhance desirable traits over generations. Pigeons could be shaped into dramatically different forms from a common ancestor. If humans could produce such change through selective breeding, Darwin wondered, could nature do something similar without conscious intention? This question led him to the principle he called natural selection. In the natural world, organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive. Resources such as food, shelter, and space are limited. This creates what Darwin described as a struggle for existence. It is not always a direct battle of tooth and claw. Often it is a quiet competition, a subtle race to gather enough nourishment or evade a predator. Within this struggle, individuals possessing traits that offer even slight advantages are more likely to survive and reproduce. Over generations, these advantageous traits become more common in the population. Darwin emphasized that natural selection works gradually. Small changes accumulate over vast periods of time. Given enough generations, these incremental shifts can produce remarkable transformations. What begins as variation within a species can eventually lead to the formation of entirely new species. Life branches outward like a great tree, with common ancestors at its roots and diverse descendants spreading in countless directions. The relationships among species are not separate and independent, but interconnected through shared lineage. Darwin's most powerful insights was that extinction is a natural and inevitable part of this process. Just as new species arise, others fade away. The fossil record, though incomplete, reveals a history of organisms that once thrived but no longer exist. Extinction clears ecological space, allowing new forms to emerge and diversify. In this way, the history of life is both creative and destructive, shaped by shifting climates, changing environments, and the relentless pressure of competition. Darwin knew his theory would provoke resistance. It challenged deeply held beliefs about the immutability of species and humanity's special place in creation. Yet he did not present his ideas recklessly. He carefully gathered evidence from geology, comparative anatomy, embryology, and biogeography. He acknowledged gaps and uncertainties, openly discussing potential objections. His tone was not confrontational but methodical. inviting readers to weigh the evidence and consider the logic of his arguments. At its core, On the Origin of Species is not merely a scientific treatise, it is a new way of seeing the living world. It suggests that the complexity and beauty of life do not require constant miraculous intervention, but can arise through natural processes operating consistently over time. From the smallest insect to the grandest mammal, all organisms are connected through descent with modification. In this opening movement of his argument, Darwin lays the foundation for a vision of life as an ever-changing tapestry, woven by variation, struggle, and selection, stretching across the immensity of geological time. As Darwin continues to unfold his argument in On the Origin of Species, he turns our attention more deeply toward the mechanisms that make evolution not only possible, but inevitable. If variation exists, and if more organisms are born than can survive, then the struggle for existence becomes the silent engine driving change. Charles Darwin invites us to look at nature not as a peaceful garden in perfect balance, but as a dynamic and often harsh arena where survival depends on subtle advantages. Every plant reaching for sunlight, every predator hunting prey, every seed seeking fertile soil is participating in this quiet but relentless competition. Darwin expands the idea of the struggle for existence beyond obvious confrontations. It is not only wolves chasing deer or rival stags locking antlers, it is also plants competing for moisture in dry soil, birds competing for nesting sites, and even organisms struggling against climate itself. A sudden frost, a drought, or a slight shift in temperature can determine which individuals survive long enough to reproduce. Those with traits that offer resilience, thicker fur, deeper roots, sharper vision, better camouflage, leave behind more offspring. Over countless generations, these traits accumulate and reshape entire populations. Darwin's most persuasive strategies is his focus on gradualism. He argues that nature does not leap forward in dramatic, sudden transformations. Instead, it moves through small, incremental steps. A slight variation in beak shape may give one bird an advantage in cracking harder seeds. That small advantage means better nourishment, greater strength, and more surviving offspring. Multiply that process over thousands or millions of years, and the once subtle difference becomes profound. The species diverges, adapting ever more precisely to its environment. Darwin also introduces the concept of divergence of character. As populations spread into different environments or adopt different habits, natural selection favors traits that reduce competition between them. Over time, this leads to increasing differences among groups that once shared a common ancestor. The result is a branching pattern of life, which Darwin famously illustrates as a tree. From a single trunk, countless branches extend outward, each representing a lineage adapting to its own ecological niche. Some branches flourish and multiply, while others wither and vanish. This branching pattern explains both the diversity and the similarity of life. Species within the same genus resemble one another because they share a relatively recent ancestor. More distant similarities point to deeper ancestral connections. The natural system of classification, which groups organisms based on shared characteristics, begins to make sense under this framework. It is not arbitrary. It reflects real genealogical relationships. The nested hierarchy of life, species within genera, genera within families, mirrors the branching structure of evolution itself. Darwin does not shy away from addressing difficulties in his theory. He openly discusses the complexity of organs, such as the eye. Critics argued that something so intricate could not possibly have arisen through gradual modification. Darwin responds by suggesting that even a simple light-sensitive cell would confer an advantage. If that basic structure could be improved step by step, slightly better focus, slightly sharper distinction between light and dark, then over immense spans of time, the eye's complexity could emerge naturally. The key is that each stage must be useful to the organism possessing it. Another challenge lies in instinct. How could behaviors, especially those as intricate as the hive building of bees or the migration patterns of birds, evolve through natural selection? Darwin proposes that instincts, like physical traits, vary among individuals. Those variations that improve survival or reproductive success become more common. Even behaviors can be shaped gradually by the same forces that shape anatomy. Over generations, natural selection refines not only bodies, but also patterns of action. Darwin's reasoning constantly returns to evidence from the natural world. He points to geographic distribution as a powerful confirmation of descent with modification. Species on islands often resemble those on the nearest mainland, yet they differ in distinct ways. This pattern suggests colonization followed by adaptation, not separate acts of creation. The unique species found on islands reflect isolation combined with natural selection acting in specific environmental contexts. Through all of this, Darwin reinforces a single unifying principle. Natural selection explains adaptation. It accounts for the fit between organism and environment without invoking special design. It operates automatically, generation after generation, wherever variation and competition exist. There is no foresight in this process, no predetermined goal. It is shaped by immediate circumstances and cumulative effects. Darwin deepens our understanding of how life transforms. The grandeur of his vision becomes clearer. The diversity we see today is the outcome of countless small changes filtered through the sieve of survival. Each species carries within it a history written not in words, but in inherited traits shaped by struggle, divergence, and time beyond ordinary imagination. As the argument on the origin of species continues to unfold, Charles Darwin turns toward some of the most pressing objections to his theory, confronting them not with defensiveness, but with careful reasoning. If species evolve gradually through natural selection, then why does the fossil record not display a perfectly smooth chain of transitional forms? Why do we not see every small step preserved in stone? Darwin acknowledges this difficulty openly, admitting that the geological record appears incomplete. Yet rather than undermining his theory, he argues that this very imperfection explains the apparent gaps. Fossilization, Darwin reminds us, is a rare event. Countless organisms live and die without leaving any trace behind. Entire ecosystems can vanish without being preserved. Sedimentary layers are disrupted, eroded, and reshaped over vast spans of time. What we uncover in rocks is not a complete archive of life's history, but a fragmented collection of snapshots. From this perspective, the absence of intermediate forms is not surprising. It reflects the limitations of preservation, not the absence of gradual change. Darwin invites us to imagine the immensity of geological time. The Earth is not a few thousand years old, but unimaginably ancient. Slow processes, erosion, sedimentation, volcanic activity, have been at work for millions upon millions of years. If evolution proceeds gradually, then vast stretches of time are required for noticeable transformation. The fossil record, though incomplete, still reveals patterns consistent with descent and modification. Simpler forms in older strata, more complex and diversified forms in newer layers, and a progression that aligns with branching lineages. So addresses the geographical distribution of species in greater depth. The patterns of life across continents and islands offer compelling evidence for common ancestry. On isolated islands, species often resemble those of the nearest mainland, yet they exhibit distinctive adaptations. The fauna of the Galapagos Islands, for example, closely resembles that of South America, even though the environmental conditions differ. This suggests that ancestors migrated from the mainland and then diversified under new selective pressures. If species were independently created for each location, such close resemblance would be difficult to explain. It further examines how barriers, mountains, oceans, deserts, shape the distribution of organisms. When populations become separated by such barriers, they evolve independently. Over time, their differences accumulate. This process of isolation helps explain the origin of distinct species. It also clarifies why neighboring regions often share related forms, while distant continents host very different assemblages of life. The map of life mirrors the history of migration and separation. Embryology provides another powerful line of support. Darwin observes that embryos of very different species often resemble one another in early stages of development. The embryos of mammals, birds, and reptiles share striking similarities before diverging into their mature forms. These resemblances, he argues, reflect shared ancestry. Early developmental stages preserve traces of evolutionary history, like echoes from a distant past. As organisms grow, they diverge according to the specific adaptations shaped by natural selection. He also discusses rudimentary or vestigial organs, structures that appear reduced or functionless, such as the tiny wings of flightless birds or the remnants of hind limbs in certain snakes. These features make little sense if species were independently designed in their present forms. However, they become intelligible under the lens of descent with modification. They are inherited relics, once useful in ancestors, but gradually diminished as circumstances changed. Throughout this exploration, Darwin emphasizes that his theory unifies diverse fields of knowledge. Classification, paleontology, geography, embryology, and comparative anatomy all converge toward single explanation. Species are not isolated creations, but branches on a vast and ancient tree of life. Each line of evidence strengthens the others, forming a coherent and interconnected picture. Yet Darwin remains cautious. He acknowledges that many details remain unknown. He does not claim to have solved every puzzle. Instead, he presents natural selection as the most powerful and consistent explanation available. Its strength lies not in perfection, but in its capacity to illuminate patterns that were previously mysterious. By the end of this movement in his work, the reader begins to see the depth of Darwin's vision. Evolution is not a speculative idea resting on a single observation. It is a framework that brings together countless facts into a meaningful whole. The scattered pieces of natural history, fossils in cliffs, embryos in wombs, species on islands, and rudimentary organs in living creatures, fall into place within the grand narrative of descent and change. Life, in Darwin's telling, is a continuous unfolding shaped by isolation, adaptation, extinction, and inheritance across the immeasurable canvas of time. As On the Origin of Species moves toward its conclusion, Charles Darwin steps back from the intricate details of evidence and mechanism to reveal the full grandeur of his vision. By this point, the reader has traveled through variation, natural selection, divergence, geology, fossils, embryology, and geographic distribution. Now Darwin invites us to see the unity beneath it all. Life is not a scattered collection of unrelated forms. It is a vast, interconnected web, shaped by descent with modification from common ancestors. Darwin reminds us that natural selection is not the only force at work. Conditions of life, climate, food supply, habits, play a role in shaping variation. Use and disuse may strengthen or weaken organs over generations. Correlation of growth links different parts of the organism in subtle ways, so that a change in one feature may influence another. Yet among all these influences, natural selection remains the central organizing principle. It preserves beneficial variations and rejects harmful ones, steadily refining adaptation without foresight or intention. He also reflects on the nature of extinction. The same process that produces new forms inevitably eliminates others. As species become better adapted to particular environments, they outcompete less adapted forms. Entire branches of the evolutionary tree may disappear, leaving only faint traces in the fossil record. Extinction is not an anomaly, but a natural outcome of competition and change. The living world we see today represents only a small fraction of all the life that has ever existed. Darwin's theory reshapes humanity's place in nature. Though he does not dwell extensively on human evolution in this book, the implication is unavoidable. If all species share common ancestry, then humans too are part of this branching tree. We are not separate from nature, but participants in the same processes that shaped every other organism. This realization carries profound philosophical weight. It challenges the belief in fixed hierarchies and invites a humbler understanding of our origins. One of the most striking aspects of Darwin's conclusion is his poetic reflection on the entangled bank. He asks us to contemplate a simple patch of nature, a bank covered with plants, birds singing in the bushes, insects flitting about, worms crawling through the damp earth. At first glance, it appears as a peaceful and harmonious scene, but beneath that harmony lies a complex network of competition, cooperation, predation, and adaptation. Each organism depends on countless others. Each has been shaped by an unbroken chain of ancestors stretching back into deep time. Darwin emphasizes that from such simple beginnings, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been, and are being, evolved. This is not merely a scientific claim, but an expression of awe. The diversity of life, its colors, shapes, behaviors, and structures, emerges from natural laws acting consistently over immense periods. There is grandeur, he writes, in this view of life. Rather than diminishing nature, evolution magnifies its wonder. It reveals a dynamic world constantly in motion, continuously generating new possibilities. He also leaves room for future discovery. Darwin understands that his work is only a beginning. He anticipates that further research will refine, expand, and even challenge aspects of his theory. Science, after all, advances through questioning and evidence. What he offers is not a final word, but a powerful framework, one capable of integrating new findings and guiding exploration. The impact of On the Origin of Species extend far beyond biology. It transforms how we think about change itself. It replaces static models with dynamic processes. It shows that complexity can arise from simplicity, that order can emerge from natural laws without deliberate design. The theory of evolution by natural selection becomes a lens through which we interpret not only the past, but the present diversity of life around us. As the book closes, Darwin's voice remains measured and thoughtful. He does not claim certainty in every detail, yet his confidence in the overall argument is unmistakable. The evidence converges from so many directions that the conclusion feels inevitable. Species are not immutable. They are products of history, shaped by variation, struggle, inheritance, and time. In this final movement, the reader is left with a sense of scale and connection. Every organism alive today carries within it the imprint of ancient ancestors. Every forest, ocean, and meadow is part of a story billions of years in the making. Through patient observation and careful reasoning, Darwin unveiled a vision of life that is both humbling and inspiring, a vision in which all living beings are bound together in a shared evolutionary journey, continually unfolding across the vast theater of the earth.